Hello and welcome back to the Bikefit and Beers podcast. We are back with Lee Prescott from Velo Atelier in Warwickshire and also the president of the IBFI. And today we're going to be talking about frame geometry. What's gone wrong? Has it gone wrong? How has it changed in recent years? And also the benefits of custom bikes. So, okay, interesting one this, because so something I want to talk about is, I'm going to talk about the Pinarello X because people love to hear me talk about and bang on about that bike. But do you think frame geometry has changed? You've been a frame builder for 15 years. You've been building bikes for more than double that.
Yeah.
How do you think frame geometry has changed? Is it for the better or for the worse?
I would say, so for the first, between 85 and 2005, frame geometry was pretty static. When I first started building frames in 85, the way you kind of worked out your geometries and kind of standardized road geometry, for instance, didn't change massively up until about 2005-ish.
Okay.
Right? And that was pretty much, the standard was using like a parallel or a square frame. And what I mean by that is your seat tube dimension, so, what people like to call 54s, 56s, all that sort of stuff, was roughly equivalent to the top tube dimension.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
So, and that's what we'd call a square frame or a gated frame. Where it started to change was around sort of 2005-ish, mid-2000s, where carbon, like moulded carbon frames started to become much more the norm. And so geometry was starting to become more of a function of mould economies and how you were best sharing different bits of the mould sub-assemblies between frames.
Talking early TCRs, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it actually, I think we went through a real dark age of that then for a little while. Carbon frames started off great with tube-to-tubes construction, things like the Parleys of old. And, those were still being built very well. But then you hit kind of productionization of carbon frames and it kind of all went wrong for a little bit. And when we're left with the tail end of that. And, we'll get into it a bit more for sure. But, I think it's beginning to get better. I think most of the big brands especially have realised they've gone too far in the wrong direction. But when you're laying down moulds for a frame, they're sometimes in the millions of pounds.
And
you've got years and years of use of those before you can change them.
Yeah.
So even if you lay it down and it's wrong, you're stuck with it for a bit.
Yeah.
So these big brands putting down unique moulds are like massive ships that take ages to turn, and it's one of the reasons why I think custom has become so much more interest in that in recent years, because custom buildings can change on a dime.
Yeah.
So, but there's definitely some ergonomic stuff that big brands have chased that is nonsense.
I think that the racing bike the racing bike has changed. I think something that we probably ought to talk about and consider is the rise of the endurance bike, which I kind of feel like started with bikes like the Trek Pilot, which was essentially a Madone with a 30mm extension on the head tube. Cervelo made a bike called the RS, which again was an R3 with a whacking great big head tube on it. And these bikes sort of retained almost race geometry, like a 73-degree head and seat angle, but they were so high at the front end, they just rode really poorly. As well as the fact they sort of tried to engineer compliance into the back end of them, which made them kind of all a bit noodly to ride. But because there are a couple of different directions this discussion can take, isn't there? We can talk about the race bike, which frankly these days don't really fit anybody. The reach figures are incredibly long and
they're way too low.
Yeah, exactly. All of this kind of stuff.
You have to stick a 50mm stack on any aero bike and all that nonsense.
And with a lot of the bikes these days, you can't even run 50mm stack. You can't even run 50mm spacers. And we can also talk about how the endurance bike has changed and evolved over the years, and it's a much newer breed of bicycle. I feel like fit has taken very much a back seat. I think you mentioned something interesting about how the engineering and the construction process is sort of almost dictating the geometry of this bike. Something that I've noticed with certain brands is same seat tube angle across the size range.
Yeah, because it's the same sub-assembly.
I mean, that is ludicrous. The fact that that's even allowed to happen.
Yeah. Same with bottom bracket drop.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
why does that not change across sizes?
Because of the ISO for clocking the ground. Who knows? So bottom bracket drop is if you draw a straight line between the axles, the front and the rear axle of the wheels, and the bottom bracket drop is how far below that line the bottom bracket is. And bottom bracket drop seems to be the same whether you're on a 48 centimeter bike or on a 63 centimeter bike, even though the crank length difference is going to be, could be vastly different depending on the needs of the rider. Yeah. I've actually done a reasonable amount of experimentation with bottom bracket drop myself. All of my bikes have a 10 millimeter lower bottom bracket, mostly because I like the way that it rides.
Yeah.
Lower center of gravity. You know, handles better.
Yeah. Aerodynamics are better.
Yeah. And I think it also increases the stack.
Yep.
So it's a very valuable way. It's a good way of increasing the stack of the bicycle without necessarily increasing the head tube length.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Especially now that we're moving towards an era of slightly shorter crank lengths as well, right?
Hopefully.
So then you don't need the bottom bracket to be quite as high. And it makes your cornering better.
So what you're saying is Tadej Pogacar's obsession about 165 millimeter cranks is going to make all of our bikes fit us better.
Eventually it might.
Yeah, it might do. It's catching on.
It would be nice.
Catching on. So, yeah, I think I'm a very, like you, I suspect, I'm a very firm believer in custom bikes and designing a bike around a rider, particularly when you have individuals who are outside of the realms of averages, the law of averages, you know, and by that I'm talking anybody less than 5'5", anybody taller than 6'2", 6'3", generally are almost exclusively requiring custom bikes, in my opinion. And there will be lots of naysayers out there that think I'm full of shit, but frankly, we look at human beings on a bicycle for a living, and I think there are very big problems with the way that some bikes are designed. I believe that bicycles are scaled. So like a big bike is scaled from a 54. They scale it one way for big bikes and the other way for little bikes.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's really difficult because, you know, I've designed production frames. You know, I've spent my time in China product managing molds and things for brands. So I understand the commercial reality of some of this stuff, right? But from a pure bike fitting perspective, the big problems I think that we see is that the people typically designing these bikes are not, for a start, speaking to fitters, and they're not looking.
What do we know?
Well, yeah, exactly. But also, they're not actually speaking to the people who ride the bikes.
No.
You know, they may be getting feedback from pros who, are being paid by them. So they'll say yes, regardless of what you ask them. I mean, we've all worked with pros and you know what they're like sometimes when they don't want to say boo to a goose in case they lose the contract. And there's fiscal means around how they reflect on stuff. And I think the bit that's really missing is rather than looking at what X other brand is doing, oh, they've dropped it 5 mil and gone a bit longer, and we should probably go 6 mil then. It needs to come back to looking at, you know, proper anthropomorphic data, work through actually how each frame size is going to fit you. You know, I've talked at length in the past around if a properly designed bike range ought to be so that if you're in the bang in the middle of a frame size, you should really also fit on the one below it and the one above it at the extremes of those, right? You should have 50% overlap between every frame size. Yeah. If it's done properly. I mean, I can name the amount of brands that do that on one hand, pretty much.
Pinarello.
Meteor Works.
Yeah. Bang your own drum by all means.
Which is my brand.
Yeah.
You know, bias.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's how it should be done in a perfect world. And custom builders or small frame builders can do that because we're not restricted by mold shapes and the reality of millions of SKUs and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think, some of the big brands do a better job of managing that than others, for sure. And I think it's telling that Pinarello, who are arguably smaller than some of the big brands, are able to do things like the X because they're not having to work with such a massive amount of SKUs.
I mean, yeah, I think the key, I think you've almost hit the nail on the head, in my opinion, is the amount of sizes. Now, when you look at a lot of the bigger brands, I mean, actually, to be honest with you, if you take Trek and Specialized, once upon a time, and also Cannondale actually is a big one here as well. Once upon a time, those bikes, they were available in 8 to 12 sizes, in 2 centimeter increments. And, you could choose, you could probably ride a 52, a 54, and a 56. And it has now, and it's all in the name of, improving margins. And in my opinion, it's all in the name of improving margins. By reducing the amount of numbers of bikes that you sell, you end up with this multi-fit geometry that I think really gave rise from Giant. Giant always, the TCR was always what we called a multi-fit geometry frame. Correct me if I'm wrong here. But there are some small, as you say, outliers that are making decent size runs of bikes. I mean, for instance, the Pinarello, an X Pinarello, is available in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's available in 9 sizes, which is almost double what you would get from one of the big brands. And and I have said this to my customers in the past, where I could ride a 515, but I could also ride a 490 and a 530. And to the viewers at home, that is that's a seat tube measurement. In fact, it's an effective seat tube measurement. So there isn't a single tube on the bike that actually measures that. So people think I'm 5'10", people think me riding a 515. It's got a 53.5 centimeter top tube. But anyway, I think the options are really what's going to make a difference to people.
Yeah.
Because I don't know whether you agree with this, but I feel like racing bikes, I don't sell that many racing bikes, and when I do sell them, they're typically to racers. But racing bikes don't really seem to have changed much geometrically. If they have, they've changed in the name of aerodynamics, for instance. So things like seat angles have become steeper.
Yeah.
And based on some of my findings with regards to kind of saddle interaction, I don't think a steeper seat angle is necessarily a bad thing. But exactly as you say, like the reach figure and the stack figures of these bikes, just again for the viewers at home who don't necessarily know what stack and reach is. So stack is the vertical distance from the center of the bottom bracket, which is what the cranks spin on, to the center of the head tube. And the reach is the horizontal distance from those 2 points as well. So there basically is a very, very basic understanding of where the handlebars are going to wind up in relation to the saddle. So these racing bikes they're still in the extreme, right? They're still
and I think the problem with anything like that is, the World Tour boys riding any of their bikes are pretty high functioning individuals, right? Yeah. So they're working at a professional level with flexibility, functionality. So they are able to comfortably sit in positions for much longer periods than people who are not doing this for their job.
Yeah.
But it creates an aesthetic, right, that people then want to try and copy.
Yeah.
And people buy with their eyes, ultimately, if they don't get a fit first. So, a lot of the brands are essentially creating the bikes that people want to buy with their eyes. They're creating these long, low, they look fast before they're even being ridden type bikes. Unfortunately, the harsh reality for most people is that when they then buy that bike, they're not going to go fast because it's going to be incredibly uncomfortable, and they're not going to be able to fit it properly.
Yeah. Is it too much to ask for both? No. Is the reality.
No.
You can have a bike that looks fast and rides well and is comfortable and fits properly and allows you to function optimally.
Yeah.
It's just that you need to be...
I mean, maybe, I don't want to bang the same old drum, but that's really where custom comes in, right? Is because even if you've got what would be classed as an endurance position, in inverting commas, you can still make it look like a race bike.
Yeah.
If you design it right.
Yeah. It's the untrained eye.
So,
Yeah.
you know, none of this stuff's impossible. It's a difficult conversation because, you know, I understand the commercial reality behind some stuff, but I think there's also some laziness in terms of the ergonomics that's gone on for a few years or maybe decades with some design channels that have been going on.
But, you know, the laziness, is it laziness though? Or is it active? You know, this is the same reason why you see proprietary wheels and proprietary cockpits, proprietary saddles, seat posts. It's all in the name of boosting margins. Surely. I mean, forgive the cynic, but...
Yeah, I mean, and the problem is it's pretty hard to be a professional in the bike industry and not end up quite cynical. You know, it is why I've had to step away for a couple of years on occasion. I think, you know, my original background, like my first degree was in industrial design, right? And I look at some stuff that comes out and just think, what are they thinking? You know, and it's like clear that it's been designed to reduce the amount of SKUs they're having to hold or to fit it in a bike box more easily or, you know, not, and then it's being marketed as a benefit to the customer. It's like, well, you try telling them that when they've come into the service centre and had to pay for 8 hours of labour to change a £10 headset bearing.
Yeah.
You know?
There's definitely a lot of that.
And it's so unnecessary because if you look at some brands do the same job but just do it so well.
Yeah.
You know, just by applying a bit of good product design and a bit of thought.
Yeah.
You know, good design costs no more. So
when you say lazy, you're talking more about the mechanical side of things.
Yeah. I mean, there's just there's that constant balance with any big brand of obviously they've got to earn money, right? And they've got to balance what their outlay is with what they're bringing in. So they're constantly trying to cut costs, and depending on which brand it is, they're also spending an incredible amount of money on marketing.
Yeah.
None of the marketing helps make the product better.
No.
All that does is make a product sell better.
Yeah.
You know, so
pushes it all out to the
I always
public.
really like the brands that practically do no marketing and let the better mousetrap sell itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, just because 20 of the world tour teams are riding the bikes doesn't mean they're a good bike.
No.
It means they're spending a lot of money paying professional teams to ride those bikes.
And that money's got to be saved or recouped somewhere. It comes from bolstered margins.
Yeah, or reduce QC costs,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
you know, it's all got to come from somewhere.
Absolutely.
Or the price simply goes up, which you know is another hot topic in the media, isn't it? Is you know, bikes are too expensive, and it's like only if you choose to pay that much.
Well, I mean, but I don't disagree with that. I mean, you know, so when I started first selling custom bikes, probably about 15 years ago, and back then, a custom bike, the custom bikes we were selling Gurus, and they were steel frame, 105, rim brake, aluminium rims, like so, hand built wheel, and it was 10,000 quid.
Right.
Yeah, and this is quite a while ago, and at the same period, 10,000 quid bought, like 8,000 quid bought you a tarmac, an S-Works tarmac with ceramic speed bearing surfaces, full Dura Ace, didn't have disc brakes, but you know we're talking pre-disc era, and there was a stark contrast between what you got for 10 grand for custom versus what you got for off the peg. Whereas now, I mean, I've just started a collaboration with Sato, and we're building a full custom geometry, custom carbon frame, handmade in Italy, with 105 Di2 and handmade carbon wheels for £7,500, which, you know, all of a sudden that's half the price of an S-Works. So the landscape for custom is definitely changing, but I think that's being driven by the price increases for off the peg.
Off the peg, yeah.
Because off the peg for like £10,000 for an off the peg frame or bike
It's mind-boggling, right?
It's madness.
When you can get a really high quality bespoke geometry carbon aero frame for £5,000.
Yeah.
£6,000. You
Mental.
know, it's just so unnecessary.
But I guess people don't really know. They don't know otherwise, though, do they? And I think, to the point of like things like Meteorworks, for instance, beautiful frames, but not like we sell something, a brand called Stelbel, steel frame again, little Italian brand, and we sell very, very few of them because people don't want steel. They don't want metal bikes. Like they're wrong, but they, everybody wants carbon these days. Yeah. And I guess this kind of to go full circle and back to the geometry thing. That is basically what's driving this geometric issue, isn't it? That we're building bikes. We're building 5 bikes to fit a litany of different body shapes, and unsurprisingly, people have issues.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when we started Meteorworks, that started purely as a custom frame thing. Just because I started my career in custom frames. That's really where I come from originally. And so it was inevitable that I was always going to end up doing a custom frame brand as well. When we started to do our little kind of small batch produce stock geometry frame, which is this one behind me, that really was an exercise in, I keep getting asked for the same bike repeatedly.
Yeah.
So actually, why don't I just make this simpler for people? And if I do my sums right and look at my data properly, I can probably produce a frame set in a range of sizes that will fit nearly everyone, which it basically does, right? But we've intentionally kept it small.
Yeah.
Right? Because to me, and to be fair, with all the stuff we do here commercially, we're here for the long term, right? I don't want to make a quick buck off selling Meteorworks. So I don't want to get too big and popular. I want to keep the exclusivity. To steal kind of Andy Kessler's phrase from Open, we work really hard to say small, right?
Yeah.
Because I would much rather keep going at this level for 20 years than have a big boom and then a bust the following year.
Yeah.
Because, I love building frames. It's one of the things I do to calm down, actually. If I've had a crazy week in the fitting studio, sitting and filing tubes in my workshop on my own for a couple of days is what levels me back out again.
You strike me as quite a calm guy anyway.
Mostly.
Business owners always have a little bit of a hectic moment though, don't they? So something I want to call someone out here actually, this because I think just kind of harking back to the geometry thing, I think there are outliers. I mean, we've talked a bit about Pinarello, obviously we talked about Meteorworks. I mean, let's talk about a brand that we have neither of us have any actual interest in, and I'm talking about the Pearson Forge. So we've got nothing to gain from this conversation, but I think this is a very clever bike. Have you looked at the geometry of a Pearson Forge?
Yeah.
And I think it's clever for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I think the way that the geometry is laid out, i.e. it is no longer small, medium, large. It is not 52, 54, 56, 58 centimetre. It is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
Which extrapolates out all of the kind of...
Gets rid of all the preconceptions,
absolutely.
Right?
All the negative
negative
connotations, thank you. All the negative connotations between somebody riding a bike that they think is, a little bike. People go, I say I ride a 52 centimetre bike and I'm 5'10", and people go, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's basically a 54 from 1986.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It's the same bike. It's just that we measure bikes differently now.
Yeah.
But yeah, this bike is just supposedly they used why when I click geometry does it not give me geometry? Supposedly they used all of their bike fitting data to kind of come to this sizing method for the geometry, but they have crazy short reach figures and reasonably high stack figures. And I must admit, I think for a bike in this day and age, this could be a real game changer. This bike.
It's a bit of a disruptor, that frame, and it's especially for a molded carbon frame. Nice to see. They haven't just white labeled an open source mold. They've actually taken the time and effort and cost to put the neck out and do something different. And I mean, I really hope it does well because it looks good, and it's what the industry needs is a few more of these.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I said this on camera once before. I can't remember whether it was on my channel or Cade, but like there is a bike that really, really irritates the shit out of me. For the reason is it is a specialized, and it's not because it's a specialized. It's the ethos. And the reason it irritates the shit out of me is that it had the potential to be an absolute game changer of a bike. Here is I can't remember how much they weigh, like sub 800 grams, sub 700 grams, whatever it is. It's a very, very light frame. It's a traditional looking frame, so it's externally rooted. And it was very heavily marketed as a bicycle for the people. It's tarmac geometry. Doesn't fit anyone. It's got the same head and seat angles as tarmac. It's got the same stack and reach as tarmac. Like, what? Make it Roubaix geometry. It would have been amazing. It would have been that would have been a game changer. Yeah. It was a bike that everybody wanted. Everybody wants light. Everyone wants comfortable. They think they want aero, but they don't until they actually ride an aero bike and realize they all ride like shit. And it could have been incredible, but no.
Yeah, it was definitely a missed opportunity. That. Yeah, it's especially for a frame with such kind of conventional tube shapes.
Yeah,
the compliance that they would have given. It was a perfect opportunity to produce a bike that would have really got people into cycling.
Yeah.
Lightweight carbon frames.
Enhance the enjoyment of the sport, right?
You know, and like if they'd got that right, it would have been a perfect, this is for me. I'm going to get another bike and I'm going to get and now I need my gravel bike. And, it would have really hooked people into the sport. Whereas I think a lot of people read how it was marketed, got on it and just went, if this is what it's like, I don't want anything to do with it, thanks. It's just a missed opportunity in my eyes.
Yeah.
Whereas to me, I think if Pearson can get the word out, and I think that'll probably be their hardest job is getting enough people to understand what they've tried to do.
I mean, it still suffers from things like there aren't enough sizes, but I mean, as a little brand, this is a little bike shop from Southwest London we're talking about. They're not a big conglomerate.
No. So to do what they've done is very courageous.
Yeah, absolutely. So hats off to you, Pearson Cycles, Will and Guy. I hope you're watching and listening. They are mates of mine, but I'm not plugging them for no good reason. I think we should shift the conversation on to custom geometry because at the end of the day, like race geometry is good for racing bikes or good for racers, sorry. Endurance geometry is good for people who just want like a nice, relaxed bike.
Yeah.
What if you want to be comfortable and you want a bike to look good and what if you want both?
Yeah. Well, obviously there's custom.
Yeah.
But actually, there is something else we've been seeing quite a bit of up here, which is people buying gravel race bikes and using them for the road.
Okay.
Because they're typically a bit short, a bit higher than the road race bikes. Mm-hmm. So they're kind of an endurance geometry, but they still look cool.
Do you have an example?
Still a bit sexy.
What bikes are we talking?
I'm rubbish with the names. So, for instance, the specialized gravel bike that has
the Crux.
The Crux.
Yep.
We've seen people throw in, like nice deep section aero road wheels on those and using those as their road bike.
As a road bike.
Because it's that in between an endurance and a race road bike, but it still kind of looks cool. It's add a bit of an aesthetic consideration. Whereas, like you say, most endurance bikes are kind of, it's almost like the designers have gone, it's an endurance bike, so it needs to be brown and a bit boring.
It's the poor cousin.
Yeah.
It's always the poor cousin.
This doesn't need to look cool, and it can have like fairly crap components on it, and it's almost like, well, if you're not like super functional and flexible, then you don't deserve a good bike.
Yeah.
And this is where custom really comes in. I mean, like we discussed a little earlier off mic. The real game changer for me for custom is the fact that you can now basically have a high quality custom bike for the same or sometimes even less than an off the shelf bike. Because at least when you buy your custom bike, it's right first time. Yeah?
Yeah.
You're not when you get it, you're not having to then swap the bars for ones that are at the right width for you, or the stem, and then maybe put set like an inline seat post and change the saddle and crank length's wrong. With a lot of off the shelf bikes, to get them to fit you properly, you could be spending another couple of grand straight off the bat. Whereas, spend $7,000 on a nice custom bike and that'll fit you perfectly, and you'll never have to change anything on it to start with.
Absolutely. I think, kind of going back to the point that I was making earlier about how people who are outside of the realms of averages, something that we very often find, I mean, we talked about bottom bracket height, like particularly for smaller riders. So something that most people don't understand is that when you lower bottom bracket height, you lower the saddle's height in space. So when you drop the height of the bottom bracket, you take the saddle close to the ground. So I came to figure this out, but I came to start considering this when I got my partner a bike. She's 5'3", and she has a 48 centimeter Cannondale sign out. Right. And with the saddle at the right height, she cannot begin to touch the floor. And she doesn't have, people who have watched my content in the past know I am not a fan of excessive saddle heights. So saddle's not too high. And by what it means is that we talk a lot about, when I say we, I talk about the industry talks a lot about, women's bikes, for instance, and empowering women and, making women more confident. Yeah. How confident you feel on a bicycle is directly correlated to your ability to touch the floor. And reach the brakes, for that matter. Handlebar widths are too wide, for instance. So women can't reach the handlebar. They can't reach the brakes.
And brake lever reach, such a problem.
Yeah. Why?
Yeah.
With the bottom bracket thing, if you drop the bottom bracket height by 15, 20 millimeters, you drop the saddle height in space by 15, 20 millimeters. So the rider's ability to touch the floor is significantly improved. And generally speaking, with a smaller rider, you're going to be running a shorter crank, so the ISO of a ground strike becomes null and void. Mm-hmm. So why aren't we doing this? I mean, again, it kind of goes back to, this is where custom comes in, really, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I do think, look how long it's taken. Like, we've moaned about bar width for how long now?
Decades.
Like pre-COVID, I remember being at conferences talking to some of the biomechanics boys from some of the big brands that had come over and just moaning at them about the bar width. And they're like, yeah, we know, it's in the plan. But like I said, these are big ships that take years to turn.
It's legacy, right?
And it's, we're just beginning to start see frames and bikes coming through now with bar widths that are vaguely close to human beings, right? So I think eventually, the conversation around crank length and bottom bracket drop will get there, but it's going to take the big boys, I reckon, at least a decade.
Don't you think the move to narrower bars is mostly being driven by the need to be more aerodynamic, though?
I don't know. It's a difficult one because my take on bar width has never changed.
Yeah,
I've always stuck by bars should be shoulder width, and I mean structural shoulder width, not external, right?
Right.
And so that allows you to have nice parallel arms with relaxed elbows. You can have straight wrists. You don't risk, ulnar nerve neuropathy, all of that sort of stuff. Yeah. And also your elbows point in the right direction, so you're not then. As soon as your elbows pop out and your arms kind of jerk up and down, you're getting kind of traps and rhomboids, fatiguing, and all that good stuff. The whole, inward swept brake lever thing or super narrow bars, and it frustrates me when people do it for aerodynamics. The first thing that happens as soon as you twist your brake levers in is your elbows pop out. And all of a sudden you're a much bigger sail than you were before.
By the way, for all the naysayers out, this is coming from somebody who spends a reasonable amount of time in a wind tunnel.
Yeah.
Carry on.
Yeah. And this is stuff we have tested.
Yeah.
Yes. If you have super narrow bars or you bring the brake levers in and you're very good at keeping the elbows in, it can present a short-term aerodynamic benefit. But the key there is short-term because that's not a sustainable position.
Yeah.
Right? And also, for every gain you get there are some negatives further down the body, right? Because all of that air that is now missing your elbows is now just slamming straight into your torso.
Yeah.
and that's creating a different negative pressure zone. So there's swings and roundabouts with it.
Yeah.
I've always found, and I would say I can prove this with most of the data I've got from the tunnel. Shoulder width, road bars, straight wrists, straight elbows is the most aero position. As soon as you go narrower, it can provide short-term games, but it's short-term.
Okay.
Sorry, rant over.
No, we love a rant. Okay, so what are the? Let me put it to you, because I know the changes that I make to my customers' custom bikes. What do you find yourself needing from a frame geometry that typically dictates a rider's need for a custom bike?
I think it's important to just state why someone might need a custom bike. And to my mind, there's sort of three standard reasons, right? You've got people want something unique, and that they're not going to see parked outside the coffee shop. They might want a type of bike or a bike that functions in a way that they can't buy. We used to see 10 years ago lots of people wanting what is now called an all-road bike.
Yeah.
And now you can buy them, but
Yeah.
10 years ago you couldn't. So we were making loads of those.
Yeah.
That's where our production frame came from.
Yeah.
I think what we're really talking about here is the people that functionally need one because they don't fit on production frames, right? And I think, the thing we see the most is it just stack and reach needing to be higher and shorter. Fundamentally, that's the biggest thing I see is, and when we do a bike sizing here, even if they're coming in because they want a custom frame, we'll normally do our due diligence and actually throw their position through a couple of websites to see if there is anything off the shelf that will fit them. And it's rare.
Yeah.
And normally, they've come in for like a road bike and the only thing that will fit them is like a mountain bike frame or some like 5-year-old gravel frame.
Yeah. We have a reasonable amount of situations whereby an off the peg frame will work. But the thing is, I think the key to getting a bike to fit is not just about how the rider interacts with it. It's about how the thing's actually going to handle as well.
Yeah.
Because you can make any bike fit anyone, right?
Yeah.
I could ride 56, but it's got to have a 70mm stem on it.
Yeah.
And then how's it going to ride?
It's going to handle like a shopping cart.
Exactly. Right? And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people overlook. It's kind of like either you ride a bike with suboptimal handling, or you ride a bike that is uncomfortable, or you buy something that actually fits in the first place. Yeah. And this is what kind of gave rise to my whole attitude of fitting a first and then buying later, which is it's not my attitude. It's not a new thing. It's just something that, as we've discussed in previous conversations, has sort of been lost. And I've only sort of just realised that, but it's sort of been lost in the industry. And it's maybe it's our job to kind of give it a new lease of life.
Yeah.
But I definitely find, same as you, I find that stack and reach tends to be lesser reach, greater stack.
Yeah.
I find myself with bigger riders doing a reasonable amount of steepening of seat tube angles. So for context, if you look at a 58 centimeter bike or a 60 centimeter bike, what typically happens, and this is why I have the opinion that bicycle geometry is scaled, from an average size bike to a bigger bike or to a smaller bike, because a bigger bike has a slacker seat angle in the same way that a bigger bike has a wider handlebar or a longer crank, working on the assumption that taller riders are broader, which they're not. And they also have longer torsos, which, think about most beam poles that think about most people who are very, very tall. They're built like spider monkeys. They got short little torsos, they got very, very long legs, very long arms.
Yeah.
And in order to get their center of mass all optimized for their weight distribution, you need them further forward, more in between the two wheels. So it's not uncommon for us to see 74.5 degree seat angles on big bikes. When I'm talking about when we're designing custom bikes, You don't get that on and off the peg. You just can't. It can't be done. Doesn't happen.
No.
Because they're all 72 degree seat angle or 72 and a half or whatever it is, or they're all 73 because all the sizes are 73. And that gives rise to the need for either an inline post, and sometimes, more often than not, actually, you still can't get the saddle far forward enough.
Yeah.
Which means that the saddle ends up perched right on the tip of its rails, which, guess what? Then your saddle fails.
Yeah.
There's all of these kind of underlying things that people don't really think about. And I think a lot of bike fitters don't think about it either. I've listened to podcasts where you've got people waxing lyrical about custom bikes, and none of them have ever even ridden or owned a custom bike or designed one. And you're kind of like, well, really? So it's very important to understand, like, have an understanding of how this stuff influences not only the rider's function, but also how it's going to physically make the bike ride.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I've been at this quite a long time now. Unfortunately, I'm getting old, and I think the you know, I'm a bit of a geometry nerd. You know, I quite happily will spend a couple of hours looking at geometry tables of new frames and comparing it with this, that, and the other, and that sort of stuff. I think what's really apparent is that there are definitely brands out there designing bikes with no connection to anthropomorphic data, right? And what I mean by that, so anthropomorphic data is there are various kind of companies and research institutes that have spent a lot of time measuring huge samples of human beings of all shapes and sizes, and have created kind of percentile averages for. So if you're a 5 percentile person, that means that there's only 5% of the population that are smaller than you.
Right. Okay.
Or if you're a 95 percentile, only 5% are bigger than you, so to speak. So, and if you look at things like human scale, Dreyfus, all these sorts of things, you can get these anthropomorphic data tables. You know, so for instance, workplace ergonomics is all based on this stuff, right? So,
right. Okay. So desk setup.
So desk
and stuff
setup,
like
keyboard height. You know, like how high your chair should be for the amount of knee bend, all that sort of stuff. So, you know, Herman Miller designing a new chair is referring to all this stuff so that their chair will fit between a certain amount of percentiles, right?
Yeah.
I don't believe a lot of the big brands are doing that.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate.
I can think of another word.
And you know, it's and I guess I only know about this stuff because of my background and my education, right? But when we design our frames, that we're basing it on that sort of stuff. You know, when I designed the production frame geometry, it literally we built inside SolidWorks percentile people. And then I bike fitted them to a perfect position inside the computer and then designed the frame around that. And that's the way it should be done, I think. Human first, down to the frame. Yeah. Not, let's design a frame and try and fit a person to it, which unfortunately is what I think is happening.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think if we can get one thing to change, it's, you know, trying to get more human data into the design process of these things. And don't get me wrong, some people are doing it. I mean, you know, we talked about Pearson using real life data.
Yeah.
You know,
I would have been part of some of that data.
Kudos to them.
Yeah. But I think that all the more reason gives. I think don't you think that so many of these problems would be avoided if more people just got bike fits first?
Yeah.
And just, you know, I mean, you and I both know that they would.
Yeah.
But
I mean, there's so many people that come in on a bike that is a compromise for them.
Yeah.
That didn't need to be.
Yeah.
If they'd just come in, spent a small amount of money first, it would have saved them a massive amount of money in the long run.
Yeah. Expensive mistakes.
Yeah.
And you see it time and time again, don't you? But even bike shops are doing that. They sell the bike and then they say, go and get it fitted and then bring it back or whatever it is. It's completely the wrong way around. But, you know, the industry has sort of kind of just gone in that direction and hasn't really changed. We're going to try and change it.
Yeah, yeah.
But
I think we can, you know, like locally here.
Yeah.
I have really good relationships with all the local conventional bike shops.
Yeah.
And they now will typically send people to us first.
Yeah, because they don't think you're going to
Because then they know.
Yeah.
you know, because I'm not a specialised dealer or a giant dealer or whatever.
Yeah.
They know if they come here first, they're then going to be able to sell that person the correct bike, which means they'll keep that client.
Yeah.
As opposed to just selling them something that's
Absolutely.
maybe suboptimal.
I have relationships like that with most of the direct to consumer brands. So like Fairlight, Canyon, Ribble, all of those guys send people to us. And should do. You know, anyone who works for those companies, they should be sending people to bike fitters.
Yeah.
Before, if there's any doubt about what size they should be on, that should really be. I know this is us kind of lining our own pockets, or at least it could be perceived as. But the net result is happier customers, happier riders. More people on bikes, more people in the sport,
Which is better for everybody. In
absolutely,
the industry.
it's self-perpetuating, isn't it? More people buying bikes, more money in the sport, and as a result, everything gets better. Infrastructure gets better.
Yeah.
We have more cycle lanes, and it's safer, and all of this kind of stuff. It all just gets better.
Absolutely. I mean, we don't want to get to the point where it's like the Halfords of old.
Yeah.
Where, they used to refer to people who bought bikes as gifters. And I remember a lady who used to work for them years ago. I remember she told me the average mileage of a Halfords bike before it ended in a scrap heap was 17 miles. That is not good for the industry.
No.
Let alone the planet, right? And that's just because people are getting on the wrong stuff.
But Halfords has a 75% market share of bicycle sales in the UK,
Exactly.
which is that's scary.
Yeah.
But you've got to think about the value of these bikes.
Absolutely,
Right?
yeah.
Like we're selling tyres that are worth more than the bikes that they're selling. So, it is a very different world.
Yeah.
And the average, I mean, I don't know how we define cyclist. Is it just a person on a bicycle, or is it somebody that?
Yeah, I mean that's how car drivers would define a cyclist, right?
Absolutely, but it's not the same thing.
It's not. To me, it's people who put on Lycra.
Yeah, and clip in. So you're not a cyclist if you don't clip in and put on Lycra.
Maybe not even clipping in. But,
you're in danger of being in hot water there.
Yeah. But imagine how much better and stronger the industry would be if someone like Halfords had not even a bike fitter, but someone with, say like a level 1 IBFI person in store.
Yeah.
And got everyone that came through that door buying a bike on the right size in the first place.
Absolutely.
Think how many more people would still be into cycling as opposed to riding their bike 3 times and going, oh no, that's horrible.
I mean, the forks would still be on back to front, but, it would still be fine. Would you rather have a bike with a 50mm stem on it that was optimal and rode scatty as hell like it was on crack, or would you rather have a 140mm stem and it rode like it was a boat tiller?
50 mil.
You'd go 50mm.
I'd go short because I'm used to short stems because I spent a lot of years riding BMXs.
I'd go long for the ego. we can all do with an extra couple of inches.
It's not about the size, mate.
On the contrary, based on the conversation we've just had, it's all about the size. That's about all we got time for today. And on that bombshell, this has been the Bikefit and Beers podcast. Thank you very much to Lee Prescott of Velo Atelier up in Warwick. Please make sure to give him a look if you need a bike fit or if you need a custom bike and you're in his area. And he is also the president of the IBFI, which is an institute dedicated to improving the state of the bike fitting industry. For our viewers at home watching via YouTube, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Lee, thank you very much for having us again.
You're very welcome.
We'll all look forward to seeing you all again.